Hello, my name is Erin Wagner. I am a software developer and entrepreneur, and answering a few questions about my experience with ketamine and specifically using ketamine through KetaKalm and their services. First of all, to give a little bit of context, well, let me read the first question. What initially led you to want to try ketamine therapy? To give a little bit of context, my parents are both on the autism spectrum, and they were children on the autism spectrum in the 50s when that wasn't a thing. When children like them were institutionalized and when institutions in America were a fate worse than death. For reasons I don't understand, they actually weren't institutionalized, even though they were symptomatic enough to have been. But the stories about how they were treated by their family and community is just the stuff of nightmares. So my parents, in addition to having the disadvantage of their disabilities, they also had an incredible amount of trauma. And so that's the environment into which we were born. They weren't really able to hold down high value jobs, so we grew up in pretty notable poverty. So my family kind of grew up at the intersection of neurodiversity, trauma, and poverty. So I felt my whole life like I was in somewhat of a pit. Like, we definitely were of a lower class. We didn't have access to lots of basic necessities. And I just felt like I was trying to claw my way out of that. And I finally hit this point when I was 38 years old. We had tons of money in the bank. My husband and I were kind of at the best place we had been in our relationship up to that point. We lived in an area that had all of the amenities that I knew I needed for my well-being. And I had just quit a job that had turned pretty toxic. So I finally, just all of the stars had aligned. And I thought I would feel something. But I kind of just felt nothing. I felt a lack of the stress that had accompanied my whole life. But that was it. It was just kind of a void. Fortunately, at the co-working space where I worked, one of the other people there was the director of the Psychedelic Society for the state. And so I had been learning about that. I knew that my brother had used some psychedelics for purposes of addressing trauma and had had really good experiences with it. So I thought, okay, before I go find the next job or the next project, let me just use a moment to try that out and see if it can help me. So I used psilocybin mushrooms in a very not legal way, but I did a whole class on psychedelics beforehand. I had a facilitator who happens to also have been a therapist who was there for my first session. And that's how I got into using psychedelics to address trauma. And I didn't even have the word trauma at the time. But what I found out was that so many facets of my life had been so psychologically dangerous that I had just kind of kept putting up walls in my mind, to the point that my mind had become a maze and I had kind of closed myself into just this little corner. And there were really only a couple of emotions or nervous system states that I would allow myself to feel. And I had all of these robust defense mechanisms keeping me from feeling other emotions, because earlier in my life when those emotions had come up, it had been very dangerous. And by that I mean the pain of not having positive emotions reciprocated, or having a positive emotion and getting punished and shamed for it, or having a negative emotion and having no one there to help with the regulation, even when I was just a little kid. So what the psychedelics did was they were kind of a wrecking ball that would come in and would knock down some of those walls, and I would find out what was behind those walls, and I'd be able to now use that space of my brain. The vast majority of the sessions I did, and I did probably a dozen. The first one I had a facilitator, the rest of them I did on my own. They were painful beyond words. There was gnarly stuff behind those walls. I also, this is a word that I didn't have at the beginning of my journey, emotional neglect. Like, I hadn't realized that I was raised in an environment of emotional neglect. There were memories that I wouldn't say I repressed, but I realized that I had this set of memories and I had this set of memories, and I only remembered one set at a time. I never remembered them both at the same time. And remembering at the same time really rewrote the story of my childhood. So I was having these experiences, but they were, and I would come out of one of these incredibly painful sessions, feeling so much pain, having felt so much pain, but then I also knew where the pain was coming from, and I always knew what to do about it. It was just clear at that point. And another benefit was that because I was in an altered state of consciousness when I opened up this pain, when I came out of that altered state of consciousness, it was almost like I got to leave so much of that pain in that container. I could be aware of it without having to live in it. So I was just going through this brutal process. There was even one session when I was using San Pedro or mescaline, and this was again with a facilitator who was, he used to run an addiction clinic. I was in Ecuador for that one because he could use the medicine there. I was full on suicidal, lost the will to live that night. And fortunately, again, when I came out of it and with the help of the facilitator and kind of processing what I had brought into my awareness, it was a really, really great thing for me to have done. But it just, the whole thing was a really brutal process. So anyway, at this point I had worked with psilocybin, mescaline, MDA. I had worked with a variety of different facilitators / trip sitters. I was just kind of trying whatever was out there. And one of my software development clients was working with KetaKalm, kind of advising them on business, and was telling me about it. And I said, well, sure, of course, I'd try that. So that's what got me connected with KetaKalm and why I was interested in ketamine. It was just another modality for me to try and heal this incapacitating numbness that I hadn't even realized I had been living in my entire life. Question number 2, what were your first impressions about the ketamine therapy? So first of all, be aware that at this point I had been doing really deep, in-depth, psychedelic, self-administered, for in large part, psychedelic therapy sessions for about 2 years, and was fairly well experienced in it. So, I mean, at this point, because with the psilocybin and the mescaline, I was probably at like 20 sessions that I had done. And the big thing that stood out to me about ketamine specifically was how much safer it was. With the ketamine, it was like the walls in my mind came down, but the pain couldn't reach me. I was able to walk freely the landscape of my mind, go anywhere that I wanted to go, and not have my body racked by pain. I could look straight at the pain, get to know the pain, and yet not be feeling it. So it was the benefits of these psychedelic experiences that I have been having, but without the incredible cost. I would describe it as psychedelic therapy with guardrails. It simply did not feel like I'd be able to go over the edge. So I was able to deliberately walk towards some areas of my mind where I knew I had difficulty. I know that I get really worked up around like finances, and like clearly there's something there that I haven't been able to deal with in just like my regular awareness. What is it that's behind these reactions that keep coming up? So the ketamine was just a great experience. Next question, what was your experience like during your sessions? First of all, I loved working with Brem. As I mentioned, by this point I had worked with a variety of different facilitators, including indigenous facilitators, North American facilitators, licensed therapists, hippies, like you name it. And so I had a pretty good feel for the attributes that I would trust in a facilitator, and Brem checked those boxes. He was not egoic. He had obviously a personal appreciation for the medicine, but he didn't need me to have a particular experience in order to prop up his ego, in order to prop up his story. Instead, he was super realistic. He was very good in his educating about what to expect. He spent an extensive period of time getting to know me and where I was coming from and what my comfort levels were, and helping me make sure that I was setting up an environment that would be a good experience. The kindness in Brem and just the awareness of emotions and the importance of those emotional states. He wasn't there just to get us to point B. He was there to accompany me on a journey. And that's part of what the whole trauma therapy experience has been, is finding out that emotions matter. The whole point of life is to ride those waves and to have those experiences. So I just had huge confidence in Brem from our extensive conversations together prior to my first session. During the session, he was organized and available. I didn't end up having any particular needs, because I'm pretty well versed in psychedelic sessions, but was so pleased with that. So anyway, let me back up. Took the medicine, was laying in bed. We have a room that's just off to the side, comfortable bed, low lights, had music going that I really liked, very melodic music. Took the medicine. It tastes disgusting. Held it under my tongue though, had a timer going so that I would know what the timing was. My husband was my backup person, so he was in a chair beside the bed. We had our little spit jar, although I swallowed the medicine so that I'd get kind of the second wave of it. We had a little dish with some mints in it so that as soon as I had swallowed the medicine, I could get a better taste in my mouth. It took the full 15 minutes for me to feel the effects, and then I just kind of snuggled in and got comfortable and was able to freely feel. Well, first of all, I was able to just freely feel, but then I could also freely feel positive emotions, openness, curiosity, the desire to engage with people. And I was able to, as I mentioned earlier, walk safely to the places in my mind that I knew I had triggers, but I wasn't sure what those triggers were or what to do about them. My session, I want to say it lasted about 2.5 hours. And I had set aside the whole entire day so that afterwards I'd be able to just relax. I wouldn't have to snap back into work mode. I could let myself stay open. And this leads into the next question, which is, what positive changes or improvements have you observed or seen in your lives since starting ketamine therapy? And for me, again, the ketamine therapy is part of this bigger story of psychedelic assisted therapy, but is definitely the safest one. Now, when I talk to people about potentially using psychedelic assisted therapy to address trauma, whether that's from a particular experience or whether it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder from just growing up in environments that were abusive or neglectful. When I talk to them, I recommend now always that people start with ketamine because it's so much safer. There's so much less opportunity for profound emotional pain. And then from there, we did a full ketamine series, and I actually feel like I'm ready to go back to some of the other medicines that do potentially have the dark side, but which do bring other, insights as well. I feel like I know the ketamine experience, and I'm ready to use other medicines in conjunction with that in separate sessions, of course. But the thing that it has done for me is made me aware of emotions and psychological states and nervous system states that I was not aware of because I had been repressing them from such an incredibly young age. It helped me to be more open. I was pretty closed. I was closed off to my husband. I was closed with friends. I was very rigid. I was very structured. And that was very good for my professional success. I could push anything past the finish line, but I was only kind of living my life. I should say I wasn't experiencing my own life. So I have access to more emotions. I have awareness of them. I am more aware of what's behind my triggers and what steps my subconscious has been trying to tell me to take in order to ensure my safety. It's just been a great experience overall, and I'm super grateful to have had this particular format for having the ketamine experience, being able to take it in my own home with the guidance and support of someone who's so knowledgeable and so compassionate.